Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing today? So let's get into it. I would like to learn from our audience, how many of you are filmmakers? Oh, that's wonderful. How many of you are producers? Oh, that's great. And how many of you are executive producers? Wonderful. Well, thank you for being with us here today. I'm so excited to be here with Miloš and with Mike. As you can see, or if you've read their bios, including mine, we wear many different hats, and there is nothing wrong with that. So let's get into it, and I would like to start with Miloš. And I would like for you to just share your background with the audience in terms of your career and how it started.
Sure, thank you, Maria. I actually started as a journalist. I started working in newsrooms. I went to journalism school after college, and don't know that I had a specific vision of what I was going to do, but I didn't know I'd be doing what I'm doing now. Did that for 5+ years, and then kind of had a natural progression into longer form documentary, from having started more in breaking news, daily news. And ever since about 2017, I've been in that documentary series space, doing that for nearly 7+ years now as well.
Thank you so much. And Mike, could you give us an overview of your career as well?
I did not go to film school. I did a degree in finance, and I hated it and the professors and the students. So I pivoted and became a production assistant at a post facility here in New York. I got into management there. Quickly decided that I wanted to work on the projects themselves, not on the facility side. I got into post-production supervision. I did that for years until I started, made a relationship with Ed Burns and made a few very small indies, micro budgets before micro budgets with him. And that led into a sort of an independent producing couple of years, and then Eddie got a TV series, and I was like, great, like all of a sudden we're going from having $250,000 to make a movie to having, $6 million to make an episode. But it was the same core team, so that was very interesting to me. And then I did another independent film. Then I started on Billions. I got bullied into doing Billions from some filmmakers that I worked with before. Ended up being a very good coerced change of career. And I did post for them for a couple of years, and then when I told them I couldn't do post anymore, I needed to go back to producing, we figured out a role for me to produce that show. So it's been winding and back and forth, and I've dipped into documentary along the way. And I enjoy all those different aspects to it, but that's how I got here.
Thank you. And just to demystify some of this, a lot of, I guess you could say, producers and executive producers in the beginning, they sort of step up to the plate because they think it's all about financing. And this is something that I personally do, which is, we find co-productions and so on and so forth, and we work with tax incentives. But in this case, these gentlemen have created really great relationships. And so I want to talk a little bit more about aligning with a production company and aligning with a filmmaker. Of course, there's never a guarantee. We don't do it for the laurels. We do it because we love the work. And I want to go back to you, Miloš, because you started as a boots-on-the-ground EP and a boots-on-the-ground showrunner. And so many of us want to get to learn who showrunners are and look at our projects. So can you tell us a little bit about that? And again, you have this extensive background, so both of you, it's a gift to have you for any project. But a little bit about that from you, that would to the audience, just so that we can understand what that was like for you when you first started.
Sure, like I mentioned, I was working in news and as a journalist, as a video producer though, so that involved everything from pitching stories to then going out and shooting them, coming back, editing them, and getting them on the air. So I really kind of had the skills. I was a filmmaker. And then when I shifted over into documentary series, that skill set, I think it was a very different world, journalism versus docu-series, in that it felt more siloed, where you either do field work or you do post work. And I kind of didn't subscribe to that because I had always done everything, and I was able in my early projects to kind of prove that I can do it all. And was working as a field producer, post producer, story producer, really just a producer was what I went by. And through that was able to climb up and eventually be the EP, where none of that didn't really change what I did. I still was very much on the ground, finding the stories, finding the characters, directing the crew, directing every interview, directing the edits across all my different projects.
It's so refreshing to hear, because how many times do you hear people say you're doing too much? Well, this is a product here of these two, of their success, doing all great things. And for you, Mike, when you got this pilot for Billions, my goodness, what was that like when, transitioning into television and transitioning into the series after a feature film?
So interestingly, in the independent film world, I wear all the hats, do all the different producing jobs from the beginning, raising money, negotiating contracts. Whenever we don't have that staff member, it's, the independent producer's job to go get coffee or whatever it is. Like a lot of it, there's more similarities between producers and PAs than anything else, I find. But then working on a very large show that's very well resourced, particularly later in the seasons, my job became very narrowly defined. And at one point, the showrunners came up to me, and I think it was the prep for season 5. And they're like, Mike, we've defined your role. Because I was bugging them. I was like, come on, guys, we can't just have like an amorphous EP role here. And they're like, yeah, you just do what's necessary. They're like, we got it. I was like, oh yeah? You guys are laughing. What's going on here? They're like, just make it good. Okay. But that ended up being a very fun job description. And really, like, there's always the 80-20. 80% of it is one thing and 20 is the other. 80% was very fun, and 20% was very hard. But hard in different ways. But, the transition from doing, and I've gone back and forth. Often in the off seasons, I produce an indie film, and it's wonderful. You get out there, and there's like, it's something new and different, and we're exploring, and we're meeting new people, and it's just everything's new. And then, you sort of get like midway through it, and you're like, oh man, do I miss the like seasoned professionals that there's just loads of them around, and everybody knows it, and everybody's got a good idea. Not that this doesn't happen in independent film, but it's like there's more no's for the ideas. It's like, no, I've done that before. That does not work. So it's really different. I'm back in my independent film and documentary sort of realm at the moment, and sort of waiting for a bigger project. But Billions was 10 years. I bet on a good horse there. I'm waiting for the next horse.
You certainly did. And Miloš, for our audience, when we think about documentary, because we work independently on so many levels, and oftentimes, to go back for those of you who read Deadline and Variety, there are so many articles that are coming out now about how we should raise our own money and how we have to find independent funding if we can, or private equity, or if they're grants. But in terms of a docuseries, and maybe we could give our audience 3 points, if someone wanted to start working on a docuseries that's independent, perhaps you can maybe discuss. I know it's a very broad question, but is there something they should look for? Maybe just 3 solid points that they could step away with, where they can say, okay, well, I've learned this here today, and I just remembered, I recalled that Miloš said this on the panel. Just some advice that they could take with them if they're looking to get involved in a docuseries like you have with Welcome to Wrexham, which is a hit, as well as now also your Polo documentary, your docuseries, excuse me.
Well, neither of those projects was independent in the sense that it wasn't Filmmaker first being like, we've got this great project on our hands, who's going to fund it? It was, Wrexham, I think I can speak to the best, obviously had celebrities involved, the Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, who had a very strong relationship with Disney FX to start. So that project was very specific in that we weren't taking it out to potential buyers. It was bought before it even existed, if that makes sense. So I don't know that I have like the best advice in terms of how to get an independent project out there. You know, I think Michael can probably speak to that better just from the standpoint of the projects that I've worked on already had that sort of commitment. But I know from my development work, I mean, it's really a strange market where obviously having some sort of celebrity attachment is kind of, you need to have it now just as a standard, which is obviously frustrating in the documentary world because celebrities are often not involved in the most interesting human stories that we can find. But I think it's just about being able to also define, as sort of the part of this panel is, like who your audience is that you're after. And if you're able to do that, I think that allows other pieces to fall into place.
If I may as well, just also talking about the production company, aligning with the production company, if you're looking, it's not necessarily a network, and I think this is part of the demystifying what it is to be a producer or an executive producer, is making sure that you are aligned with the production company. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I mean, I've partnered with many different production companies, but again, with Wrexham, that was a co-production between Boardwalk Pictures, which, you know, people I'm sure know their other productions as well, Chef's Table, Cheer, Last Chance U, and they obviously did Welcome to Wrexham and Polo, but that was in conjunction with Rob and Ryan's production companies as well. And, you know, a big part of my job, especially when I was co-EP on season 2, is making sure all of those different stakeholders are happy and heard, but also kind of protecting the story that needs to be told. That you, as the on-the-ground producer who's invested in the story, is the only one who actually knows that, you know, along with the rest of your team.
And Mike, for our audience, I guess 3 major points in terms of joining a series. I mean, you were at the inception of a great collaboration, so it's always great to work with filmmakers that have new content. But for our audience, if they are trying to get involved in a television series or they want to get onboarded, maybe some advice on getting into current or maybe something with development, what would you, maybe 3 good points for our audience that they should look into?
I want to say that there's no, you know, singular path. That a lot of how I had opportunity came through happenstance, and a lot of just concentrating on doing the work and understanding what the work is and trying to figure it out and putting it all in there and developing relationships with filmmakers because of that, and building that trust and them knowing that, you know, you're fighting on their side, and if they turn their back, you're not going to operate in a, you know, a selfish manner or anything untoward. And in that regard, you know, I have long relationships with many filmmakers, and I've never actually been affiliated with a production company. And I've never had, I mean, like I have ostensibly a production company, which is just me. And the other filmmakers I work with, same. But we've never had, and I think this is just sort of, again, happenstance, that like how we've raised money, we've either done it directly through a network, and a couple of TV series, and in the independent film world, there's been a couple times when I've had a minority, you know, production company partner, one tied to like German pre-sale, but never any real collaboration. You know, there's talks and stuff, but you know, we're making an independent film. This is the script. This is the principal cast. They brought money to the table, but they didn't bring any, you know, functional expertise. And it was a little film, and it was too small to be on the radar of their big executives, and they just wanted to see, you know, a director's cut when it was ready, and they had some notes, and they weren't very useful. So, you know, I think it's partly self-determined in that I concentrated on developing relationships with filmmakers, and partly just, you know, coincidence, luck, happenstance.
What I love about you guys is that you have this ease about it. You know, you just kind of do the work and you fall into it. And I think that really comes from being seasoned and coming from such a broad background of so many, wearing so many different hats. And that brings me to a lot of the times, a lot of filmmakers and television shows, because of so much streaming and networks and so on and so forth, a lot of people are discussing branding. And when we think about branding and when we think about product placement, Welcome to Wrexham was a great opportunity for this football team to really get exposure globally. And as we're talking, you can hear that great stories repetitively is really what matters. And so when we talk about Welcome to Wrexham, and this was 3 years of your life you spent on this project, can you talk about that and the branding opportunities as well, in a very generic sense, in a very real sense?
Sure. I mean, I think two similar but different things happened on that project where, I come from a background where I'm not thinking about things in terms of marketing and branding. I'm thinking about them in terms of story. And Wrexham was just a magical place, to your point about happenstance. Like, I ended up on that project through a series of events that you can't predict, and then everything that happened there was also just very special, and it was a place and a team whose story deserved to be told, and once it was, it obviously found an audience that cared, and the team, it goes well beyond the documentary. The team has performed in ways that, people can really love them. But what was interesting about that project is, given the scale of the project, the people involved, what I had to do for the first time ever in my career was actually integrate branding and marketing into a documentary series, like during our filming, which I'd never had to do before. And it's the job. I was a little begrudging about some of it, but that's how it goes these days. I mean, they found funding from HP, and I'm trying to think who some of the other sponsors were, where it was this integrated vision where those people were sponsoring the club, but in doing so also got as natural of a mention as possible integrated into the documentary series.
And I think that's a challenge for many purists. No, we don't want branding. We don't want that Coca-Cola in our shot. But I think the way you did it actually served the project, and I think that's what made it so successful and so worthy to talk about. Mike?
I'd like to jump in on that a little bit.
Sure, please, go ahead.
Early in my career, those sort of branding opportunities, product placement, I was allergic to it. I thought, and the filmmakers I worked with, we all sort of thought this is an encroachment. And then later, as I grew up, I think the industry changed a little bit as well. Financing's a little more difficult. Now I've seen some, like A-list Hollywood directors known for having singular vision, doing their own thing, and I've had very calm conversations about product placement of like, how are we going to do this? And they put as much thought into, how do I properly get this brand in there, because I need the money for music later, or whatever it is that, you assign something to it, so it's not just money. It's, okay, I can get the title track for this, and okay, let's figure out how the Coke can goes in there. And I think Wrexham did it really well. I'm a big fan of the show, but I couldn't, I can tell you who their shirt sponsor is, but I don't remember seeing any product placement.
That's good.
Phew.
You'll see it in Billions. It's a little more obvious.
But I think this is important because this is all part of the strategy that we have to work with. And when you think about a music scene, you think about a film scene, a television scene. This is what it is pretty much now. And I think I pretty much know this answer, and so does the audience, but I'm just going to throw it out there since we're on branding. When we're looking at the scope of films now or projects, do you think that, after being on such a successful show, for your next projects, would you look at something and say, this could have a global impact? I know we're all story focused, but is that something that you're looking at in terms of your criteria now in terms of what you want to work with and who you want to work with and the content?
I always made choices on what I was going to do by the project, the people, and how much I was going to get paid. And it's a three-legged stool. It doesn't work if one of those things isn't there. And sometimes it's a shorter stool, of course. But in those choices, in who I want to work with, in what project it is, baked in there is something of significance, of impact, of importance to me, and that often is, it can be mental health, it can be a commentary about society, it can be overt or implied. But that is buried in my decision process, is there needs to be something that I can hold on to. And it's not a front of brain sort of thing. It's a gut. I read the script and that really got me. And what gets me interested is that sort of stuff.
And Miloš, for you, when you're dealing with sports content, right? That's worldly. When you think about football and you think about polo, what about you in terms of content? Are you looking at content that's more for North America, content that is for the world? Are you focused just on worldly type of global stories and things that move the world, or do you think you would ever do something regional, like maybe something in the UK on just one particular, I don't know, something on fish and chips? I don't know, something like that. I'm just trying to compare from a vastly world type of content that you deal with, from the vastly world content that you deal with, to something a little bit more regional.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in documentary, the subject is really ultimately, like, if I'm being honest, I've made a career out of making sports documentaries, and I do not care about sports. I don't watch sports. I never watched soccer in any meaningful way before working on Wrexham other than the World Cup. But that project, I put all of myself into it because I saw the potential for the story. It's a story about underdogs. It's a story about love. It's a story about devotion from a town to this team and what they all mean to each other as a community. And those are the themes that I connect with as a storyteller and filmmaker. And so, I mean, now I am a big football fan, but the point is that to me, it's not really, I'm not thinking necessarily like, oh, I don't care about polo. Like, I'll be honest, I can't say I really care about polo even after having worked on it, but I do care about the people that were in that project and the stories that they shared and they told. The point being that my affinities as a storyteller are communal. I think it's what we all connect with. And that's what I'm looking for in any project. In terms of the target audience, I will say that some of that is driven by market forces. When I'm developing a project, working with a production company that's hired me to develop something and they have potential buyers in mind, Netflix will say, we're looking for a project that is targeting North America, or we're looking for a global play. And you tailor what you're developing and how you're pitching it to fit to some extent. But for me, I don't necessarily see huge differences regionally in terms of that the themes that people will connect with. I think those are universal.
And humanity is paramount, and I think I can see that both with what you select.
I think the football in Wrexham is the Trojan horse, though, that this is about a beaten down coal mining town that could be in Pennsylvania, and about the rebirth and the world discovering these unique characters from this very small place. It's an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, and I love that. I always think of like my work as a bit of a Trojan horse, where you think this is what you're gonna, and you hook people who are into sports or whatever, but the world watched that show far beyond people who care about soccer. People were interested because of whatever reason, and then they find what they want to latch onto.
Viva the underdog. I love that. Mike, what is one of the most challenging aspects of finding a project for you? I'm sure you get quite a bit of projects across your desk. So tell us a little bit about that.
I think that's actually like a very difficult and undefinable thing for me. And it is always a struggle of how do you find something new and different and exciting to do? Or if you're deep into a season 7 of a show, how do you make this interesting and fresh and relevant and not a redux of what we did last year, 3 years ago? But I read a lot. I read a lot of newspapers. I read less books than I used to. I read scripts. I watch documentaries. If I have downtime, I try to be really open to the world, and you just never know what's going to bring you to do something. Dave Costable, who plays Wags on Billions, he got into stone wall building. Those those walls you see along farms and stuff, they're not just piles of rocks. There's like real, 1,000-year-old technique in it. So I went with him to, like a workshop for a weekend, and we built stone walls in the pouring rain. And it was fantastic. And we went and did it again, and he has a property, and I was just up there this week helping him build his stupid stone wall. But, that's not, there's no fruit has been born from that yet, professionally. And there's a half-built wall that will take years. But at the same time, a different thing that I do along those, I'm helping a friend build a survival shelter just from the trees on her property. And that's not borne any fruit either. But there's weird, random stuff that I do, and, comes down the line, and you retrace the thread. It was like, oh, it was some silly decision I made, where then I met people, and I have a relationship with them, and then, maybe it's, I meet an actor. I met an actor that I've already worked with at Dave's place this week, but it could have been a different actor who I didn't know, who later becomes the fulcrum of a different film or television show. So, I don't know. To come back to the development question, which was the beginning of this rambling answer, I don't know.
That's honest. And how about you, Miloš? What is the most challenging aspect of finding a project for you? I know you're in between several now, but what is that like for you?
I mean, I think for me personally, the ultimate challenge is I know how much of myself I put into my work. So I think as I'm getting, I spent 3 years in Wrexham on the ground, living in the middle of nowhere, Wales, and it was completely worth it. But I'm older now. I have my girlfriend at home, my family nearby, and I don't know that I have the capacity to immerse myself in projects the way I once did when I was younger and more willing to do that. And for me, that's personally the biggest decision maker with any next project, is balancing how much of myself I want to invest in it, because I want to be fully in it, but then can I with everything else happening in life? And finding that balance is extremely difficult. I can't say that I've figured it out quite yet, but no regrets either.
I'm really glad you brought that up, especially for the women in our audience, because I think that there's so many women in our industry behind the lens, in front of the lens, that maybe make decisions not to have children right away, or they sacrifice so much because of the work. And we're in a different time now where productions actually allow childcare, or they actually have women come back into the workforce. So after this, really look into organizations like NIWIFT, for those directors out there, Film Fatales. So those of you who do want to have children, or if you have children, you have a place in this industry, and you don't have to sacrifice so much, including the work. But I'm glad that you really acknowledge that you want to have a life.
But work, it's hard, because when you're working and you really care about it, that also feels like what you want to be doing. So if anyone has any advice for me on how to figure that out, I would appreciate that.
Well, I'm just glad you brought up that point for the women in our audience. And Mike, as an executive producer, you serve two masters, the showrunner and the filmmaker. What is that like? Because you are the middleman of it all. So maybe can you walk the audience through that a little bit?
I think as a producer, in general, you always serve two masters. You're serving the art and the commerce. And you have to mature into that and accept that, unless you are an absolute master and they just give you the money and you get to go do it. But for the rest of us, I think you have to accept that. For me, as far as the showrunners go, they are the filmmakers. They are the creative heads. And they're also the financial heads as well. So you sort of answer in two ways to the same people. But at the same time, it is two different things. And you don't have those two conversations in the same meeting generally, even. And I don't think that's intentional. I think that's just how people's brains work. It's like, this is a creative meeting. This is not a numbers meeting. And so you have to balance the two, and I think it's more difficult the more you hold on to an idealism. For me, like, I accept the pragmatism in that. I accept that there needs to be a Coke can in this shop. But at the same time, you know, you can, if you're good with the money, you can make better art. Is fundamentally like what keeps that intention of, like, if you spend that money more effectively, you can have more freedom and more control over what you're trying to produce.
And I think because we wear so many hats, when you go into those rooms, you do not cross that line. When you are the executive producer, you don't talk about post, right? Unless you're having a post conversation. And I think that's something that I've learned a lot of filmmakers can, you know, they make a mistake in the beginning. They come and they say, you know, I'm an actor, filmmaker, director, producer, writer, and that's fantastic. But when you are focused on one thing, you need to be focused on one thing, because when you're in that room, it's about that one thing.
You know, I just said that, and I'm going to rebut myself. Ed Burns was a very interesting person to work with when he's acting, directing, show running. He wrote the script. He's responsible for everything. And you see, like, he always does his coverage last. He comes around and does it, and him and his longtime producing partner, Aaron, and his DP, Will, they'll sit and talk about his performance, and they might play something back, and everybody just waits. And as soon as he's good with his performance, and everybody, then, you know, like, okay, next scene, next setup, whatever, and all the heads of department would attack him. They would be like, okay, here's the moment. He will just, he'll look at the crowd and be like, the production designer, that's who I need. That's the most important person to talk to right now. And he will only talk about that for 7 minutes. And he gets to the end, they have more questions, like, nope, now I need to talk to the costume designer. And it will just be that for 4 minutes. And so on and so forth. And his prioritizing of his time, his compartmentalizing of his brain, really impressive.
That type of organization and that skill set, it's so refined, because that's how it works. And it's the only way it can work is when you're able to really, you know, put things into compartments and just deal with one thing at a time. And it's very hard to train your brain to do that. And for you, Miloš, as you have to really focus on notes as a showrunner, as an executive producer, and you have a documentary series which is really complex because the field is always changing. Can you talk a little bit about that? About your notes and what you have to share, and dealing with your showrunner and dealing with the executive producers and dealing with the overall production for a doc series?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where you hope you have the best partners in terms of having the alignment, creative alignment, so that the notes are not notes that infuriate you, although you definitely get those on any project, as I'm sure you've dealt with as well. And I think it's about choosing your battles. I think that's an important thing to learn. Is early in my career, like, every note that I disagreed with, I'm like, we gotta push back, we gotta fight this. But then you learn, okay, which note can I live with so that I can really push back on another and make sure that the integrity of the story I want to tell will remain. And, you know, that's it. It just is how it goes when you're working on a project with multiple stakeholders, where everyone wants to be able to say that they had their creative imprint on it. When you are the person, you know, in documentary, I'm someone who's in the field. I'm directing it in the field and post, so I feel very protective of the story. But I don't have the luxury of financing my projects myself, so I got to make sure everyone involved feels happy.
And for those of us who have to finance ourselves, the biggest challenge for me is getting the money up front, making sure my investors are happy, making sure that we have tax incentives and they get their money right away. I mean, it's a lot of pressure, especially when you're running a massive production. Do you ever see yourself, Mike, maybe going into the field because of the scene that we're in with filmmaking, taking these meetings and possibly raising money in the future at all?
I think I've misrepresented myself there a little bit. In the television world, I've only had, you know, professional partners. In the indie film world, I've always raised money through mostly through private finance. And yes, I am doing that right now. And it's sort of an ongoing, it's project to project, but also you like to build relationships independent of projects so that when you do have something, it's not the first time you're meeting them. That said, like, it's a really difficult time at the moment. I have a hard time. I have a project right now where I feel like at the budget we can do it at, there's a marketplace for it. But I've had a hard time with some scripts where I look at them like, I don't know who's making this. I don't know who's exhibiting this. I don't know where it would go. I can't take it on right now because like hand on my heart, I can't ask people for money because I don't know where they're gonna get it back. And I don't want to represent your script and say that I can do it when I don't believe I can. So in that regard, it is a difficult time. These times, it's a cyclical business. It'll bounce back. And in prior cycles, I met Ed Burns during one of these down times, and we started making these little micro-budget films in 2008 before micro-budget films. And that was, I think the first film we used a red camera, and back at the very early days, we used a Canon 5D for a couple. And that new technology, the cheaper camera, the digital workflows, it enabled us to do something different and fit it into a difficult marketplace. And then that led on to, all of a sudden the industry's back and it's booming, and the five of us who made a film together are sitting in the middle of, an enormous cast and crew, sort of having a laugh, being like, where are we having lunch today? Like, what's going on here? Let's get out of here.
I think technology plays a big part. Before, when you'd have to roll 35 millimeter film, and it was so expensive for 3 minutes at $150 a roll, but now it's even still very expensive. I mean, my camera of choice is a Red, and we shoot 8K, and that is very, very expensive. But I think when it comes to funding your film, there's the route that I usually go, very similarly in terms of an independent film, is raising some money, getting the filmmaker started and trying to find a pre-sale. And then depending on where you shoot, there's tax incentives. But staying more focused on your careers, when I think about now with vertical coming along, is everybody familiar with vertical and that new wave of filmmaking, which is very different? So what about you, Miloš? Do you see yourself going out there and raising money for series? If there's a possibility for a vertical series that could be on the iPhone that falls under 5 minutes, do you see yourself raising money and becoming a permanent showrunner for another type of series? What are your thoughts on raising money?
I don't think I'm ever going to be the money guy who's going out there to make those deals happen with that being explicitly my job, but it is part of my work. I mean, I'm hired all the time to develop projects with myself attached as a showrunner if they get greenlit, including right now a vertical true crime documentary series that is not only leaning into the distribution side of things, but is also on the production side, looking into how AI can be part of that workflow where, everyone is talking about AI, it's inevitable. I've been working on a few projects and with AI film directors who've been creating amazing visuals and learning so much myself. And I think it's all related to the money, right? The whole reason that studios are so interested in AI is because it is inexpensive. And I'm trying to figure out what are the ways that we can use it without selling our souls along the way. And there's some really interesting applications. I mean, with true crime, they're looking at it in terms of how can we do recreations using AI. And frankly, you can do much more advanced recreations with AI than you could necessarily with actors in the room and on a much faster timescale and budget, which for a documentary is what you need to be able to sell it. But, in terms of what I would love to be doing, it's really still telling those human first stories that end up on a bigger screen rather than just on our phones. But I am very much a believer that it's best to know where the market is at, where the industry's at, and to really understand how those things work. I encourage everyone to try and engage with, but also even work in vertical digital AI so that your skill set, your sort of attractiveness to any potential partners is that much bigger?
I think that's a great point in becoming multifaceted, because when I think about working with AI, at first I said to myself, oh my gosh, look, what's going to happen to us? What are we going to do when they have actors and actresses as prototypes of everybody that's possibly sitting in the audience? I think it's so important as well that we read the literature and we read what's out there in the trades and we understand it. We understand how to work with it or how to adapt to it. So as we're moving forward, because when I look at both of you gentlemen, you both have adapted to many different hats in the industry. How do you feel about that, Mike, in terms of adapting to AI or adapting to vertical, adapting to all these different formats of filmmaking? Are you more focused on what you do, or are you willing to also open up your, I guess, your mind and your expertise to other types of filmmaking?
This comes back to my development process. I am very open to lots of things. I always have been since I was a kid, and I push myself to learn different things, to put myself in uncomfortable positions, to challenge myself, and also just to find new, different, difficult, interesting, weird things. And that organically leads to, different things that have different outlets that go to different places. AI, I do a lot of reading about, the future of our world economy on that. Not in a professional sense, in a curiosity sense. It seems dark. And at the same time, I was breaking down a script and to do a schedule and a budget of an indie film, and I've done that a lot, and it is painful. And I spent 2 days trying to figure out if there was a software, if there's AI, if anything could help me. And I did find something that, if it's usually 8 days is what it takes for me to break down a script and put together a budget that's good enough to raise money from. And it shaved 3 days off the head. It shaves another day later. And still, at some point, I'm going to have to go through and do the manual check to make sure that there's no hallucinations in there. So I embrace it. I want to know about it. I am protective of the workforce that I'm a part of. It's a very difficult thing to talk broadly with a bunch of people because we're all undereducated and overscared. But it's the same as a digital camera versus a film camera. It's the next evolution in technology, and I agree with Miloš. Like let's have our eyes open as to what's coming, and we can be prepared. But I in the diversity of interests, I find things that I wouldn't normally, I wouldn't immediately think I would do, but sort of like through a winding way, I produced a movie on maternal mental health, which, wouldn't have been my guess.
Well, thank you for doing that. We talk about challenges in 2024 at the Cannes Film Festival. Microsoft put up a booth for something called Microsoft Copilot. And I would watch the filmmakers go by, and they looked at it, and they just looked at it like in horror, like, we don't want AI here, take it out. But it was interesting as I started to test it, because I was one of the filmmakers that had to do that. I found myself streamlining my schedule. I'm terrible with my schedule. If I don't have an AD, forget it. I don't even know how I got here today. It was an awful thing with a cab. I mean, the fact that I got here and I'm holding this, what is this iPad that needs to be charged, I have, my skill sets are not in lining this up. But I think that the one thing that I learned when I opened it up and I put my schedule in there is that it actually worked for me. And what it did was it taught me what to do on my own. Like, I really need to plan my schedule this way. But in terms of in front of the camera, that's a whole other issue that I'm trying to get around as well. So, Miloš, when I think of television series and when you're developing something, back in the day, you had a one sheet, or you had maybe a show Bible, or you had something that you can submit. What is it like now pitching an idea to a network? If you can maybe speak to our audience about that.
Well, it's definitely still, a one sheet, a treatment, all of that. I will say that just even in the 7 years that I've been on this side of my career doing documentary, I've seen a change from, you could definitely sell, I'm sure you can speak to this too, you could sell a project a lot easier with a lot less material. Now I find myself shooting sizzle reels that don't feel like sizzle reels, they feel like a full pilot episode for a documentary that even that you have full access, you have the characters, you know the stories are there, and it still won't sell. And it's very frustrating because you're putting that much more work in to just try and get it across the first finish line to actually start it. But yeah, you have to, it's very, I'd say a very comprehensive package is needed to pitch these days. It's not just an idea or just a one sheet that you have to prove it out. And I would say far past what you used to have to do.
And I know that's a very large deck to submit. How about you, Mike? So let's say I come in to your office and I have an idea and I have a creative deck, and let's say I have financing involved and I'm putting this on the table and it's a pretty comprehensive idea. You can see where the value is. You love the story. Is that enough to motivate you?
Yeah, I think just love the story is enough to motivate me. And then you sort of take stock of like, where are we? What assets do we have? What does the marketplace look like? But love the story is enough to start. And then you have to use the pragmatic part of your brain of like, can we get from A to B and cross that first finish line? And it does change. Like it depends on where you are, who you're pitching to, what you're doing. Some people require more. Some people require less. You're talking about like doing sizzle reels for documentaries. I see those, and I'd see like a 45-minute sizzle reel about football in the barrios of Colombia, and I was like, this is like, wow, like what a lot of work and travel and danger you went into putting this together. I think you're off by a couple degrees here, and that's going to mean that most of that isn't going to be useful. There's going to be some stuff, but like really, they were less experienced in the documentary world, and I think that they went and shot too much, and they tried to bite too much of the apple to show that they could do it. And my feedback was like, this is a really interesting thing. Can you take those first 12 minutes, make them 6 minutes, and like make it sizzle? Like, you're not the steak. We're here for the sizzle. Like, just enough to sink the hook. So I think there can be a mistake of putting too much time and effort into that, but it depends on who you're going to. Can they, like, are you going to get a professional read or an amateur read? Are you going to get a professional watch or an amateur watch? Like I always say, when you submit a film to a film festival, assume it's going to be an amateur watch, at least at first. They're not there to say, oh, this is going to be really good once they finish post-production and stuff. So you have to put your best foot forward. You submit a finished film. Don't make them project where it's going to be, because they're not necessarily on the filmmaking side of things. They may not see things that way. And in the pitch realm, I would say the shorter, more polished version is generally the better way to go.
I think that's great advice, because sometimes, especially when you're working on independent projects, you want to go over your 6 minutes. You're compelled to. You have a lot of footage. But you're right, it sort of weeds out the professionals from those who have something to say. I mean, if it's over 6 minutes, do not call it a sizzle reel. Call it a proof of concept. Because you want to be thoughtful of people's time. But first of all, for everybody that's here and has a project here, congratulations, because this is such a wonderful film festival. So I know all of you are excited. And when we think about, again, global hits, it's sort of a broad range to say what is a global hit, because, for instance, when you look at Welcome to Wrexham, or when you look at Billions, a television show like that, The thing is, it has so many cross platforms, right? So even though you are looking at, is everybody familiar with different platforms and different networks and so on and so forth? Does everybody know what I mean by that? Because some people don't fully understand that. When you're pitching something, a lot of times, a lot of executive producers are looking at what platforms this would go on. So if it's going on Netflix, if it's going on Amazon, can it also flourish in Scandinavia? Can it find a UK platform? Can it find a French platform, or platform in France? Would this be for television? Could this be for vertical? So they're looking at all of those particular, I guess you could say, slots to put a project in. When you look at new projects, both of you, maybe you can go first, Miloš, are you looking at how many platforms this could be available to, or are you just looking at the work?
I'm personally just looking at the work. I'm story first is my focus. It's typically somebody else's job in terms of the people I'm working with to figure out where it goes. So that's it for me.
I'm very similar in that regard. That's why I got into this business. I find when I'm disciplined and I do concentrate on that the work that I produce on a day-to-day basis is better. And that I see other people, even collaborators, who sometimes lose that North Star, and sometimes you see it in the work, sometimes you see it in their behavior, and it's not as good, and it's sort of painful to say, like, you're making a mistake, and they've got too much sizzle in it. And you're like, sure, there's lots of bells and whistles, but our actors here. We don't care the camera flying everywhere. Like right now, that's the thing. So that's how my career has been built. That's how my relationships have been built. I do dabble in those other things as to where is this going to go? Where are we going to raise the money for it? This and that. It's sort of ultimately it sort of defines itself, and I'm trying to make the best possible story. And if someone says it can go on this platform, it's like, okay, how does that work? Do I have to chop this up into 6-minute chunks or 30-second chunks or wherever it is? And then you make an evaluation of this story plays out slower than that. Like, it's not going to work. Or that's not the audience. I tend to lean towards things that I would watch, and I don't like watching things on my phone.
Well, that's the thing, right? We're always picking things or choosing things that we're familiar with. But I think also, when I think of the Ken Burns, I think of the Stanley Nelson in terms of documentarians. They have no limit to their documentaries. And sometimes they're 4 hours, sometimes they're 6 hours, and they leave it up to the network to basically cut up and decide what they want to do with it. So to do maybe, we're going to open this up for Q&A, I hope, at some point. But we can do a Q&A? Great. Okay, I just want to do a rapid fire session. Whatever comes to mind. You can say whatever you want. Let's start with you, Miloš. So for the audience, a lot of people who want to become producers or executive producers, they could work for production companies. So for you, would you say just to cold call a production company? Or would you send an email with your resume and cover letter?
My story in terms of shifting over into documentary was that I did send a cold call email for a specific project that I thought I was the perfect person for, and I convinced them that I was. So I am a big believer in the cold call email, but I think it has to be with you have to be able to back it up.
How about you, Mike? Cold call, or would you send an email and a cover letter?
I would say a comprehensive approach. I would do both, and I would see if I knew anybody there, if I had a friend of a friend. The real answer for me of how stuff happens, it's work tends to beget work. That if you're trying to break into something, you're probably going to start at the bottom, and you may not even start in the right sort of micro industry within it. But I make great relationships doing a few documentary films. That's not the major thrust of my career, but I very much enjoy it. It's similar muscle groups, like mental muscle groups, but different, and it helps change the way you see things. And then that, you know, I make different relationships and I learn from different people and I make different connections. And then I go back to doing something narrative and I kind of am like, oh yeah, well, this is a different way to think about that. Let's try to integrate this and how we're doing this specific scene or this specific project. But really, like, for me, it's, you know, get out there, get busy doing something. Your career path is not going to be linear, and it may not be connected. As you said, you made a big switch. But just to be out there and to do different things, I did. I worked as a rigging grip for 3 months last winter. Things were slow. I couldn't figure out anything to get going, and I was sort of stuck. And the key grip from Billions, a few of us got together and had a drink. He said, "Why don't you come work for me for a couple days? Get out of the house." It's like, yeah, all right, sure. I've never gripped before. I don't know what any of those things are called. And I've since forgotten. I don't know what any of those things are called. But, you know, I got up and we were shooting out on the Gold Coast, and I drove my little beater out there and arrived and watched the sunrise as we waited for 6 a.m. to come to start working out in the snow. It was actually a lot of fun, and it was really strange to not have responsibility. It was quite the opposite. They're like, don't let the producer up on anything high. Which then, 2 weeks later, it's like, hey, will you go drive that lift around those power lines over here? Okay, no problem. I'm not responsible for this.
Okay. So let's say I'm a multi-millionaire, I can dream, right? And I come to you, Miloš, and I say to you, I have a lot of money. Documentary or narrative?
If you're talking to me, it's documentary.
Okay. Fair enough.
I got some ideas. You can give me the money, and we'll make it happen.
I said if. I said if. I can dream too. How about you, Mike?
Both.